deal with it. There was a professor, and he was a psychology professor, and he had one of his students help him set up a test throughout the room that had props and everything and questions to ask his class. And so one of the students came into the class and came up to one of the displays, and the student asked the question, "What do you think about this glass of water?" One of them looked at it and said, "It's half full." She marked off, pessimist. Optimist. Another student came in. She asked the same question. "What do you think about this glass and the water that's in it?" And he said, "It's half empty." Pessimist. I'll get it right. Another person walked into the class. She asked the same question about the glass. And he said, "Well, there's twice as much glass as there needs to be." She didn't know what to do, so she went back and talked to the professor. "What do I do?" "Oh," he said, "I forgot to tell you about the engineers. They don't have a personality." My dad was an engineer for Tektronix, so he's not laughing right now. We're going to be looking, I hope this doesn't bore you this morning. We're going to be looking at our personalities. We're going to be breaking down some things in our lives and our personalities. And I understand that that's not going to be the whole of the message, so please don't misunderstand me. And I remember when I first started going through personality tests and breaking things down, I'm the type of person that don't put me in a category. I don't like that. So it bugged me. It just bugged me. And it's like I've always had a little bit, if not more, resistance against this type of thing. So I do understand. I do get it. But bear with me. This will really, I pray that this morning it will be very profitable for you spiritually and as well for the body of Christ, your relationship with the Lord. What I want to do is I want to read the text that is the series theme, and that is, can you handle going deeper? And we're going to look at Hebrews chapter 6, the first part of verse 1. Therefore, let's leave the elementary teachings about Christ and go on to maturity. God's word instructs us as Christians to move on to maturity. Don't just settle with just attending church and just kind of going through the motions of your faith. Go deeper. In this message, I pray and hope that it will help you see who you are better to be able to go deeper. Mark chapter 12, verse 28 through 31. We're going to look at the famous text that is known that John Wesley had preached. It was his favorite text when somebody would ask him, "What do you mean about sanctification? What does sanctification mean?" He would always respond to them with a question back. Do you love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength? And he goes on. There's other references, of course, that have different elements and orders to that. But the person would respond, "Yes, I do." Or they would respond, "No, they don't." But when they responded, "Yes, I do," then he would look at them and say, "You are sanctified." That you're set apart for God's use. Okay, let's look at the text. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Jesus is already dialoguing with the Sadducees. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked them, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" "The most important one," Jesus answered, "is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Now stop right there. You're probably asking, how could that answer the question? What Jesus is doing right there is stating a proclamation. It's like saying, "Hear ye, hear ye." Everybody had Christ's attention when he said that. It's a proclamation. It's an attention getter for everyone to pay attention to what he now says. Verse 30, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. The second is this, to love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Notice this, he doesn't say that this is just a good teaching or that this is a suggestion. He says that this is a commandment from God to you and me. But let's break this down just a little bit. First of all, he says to love the Lord your God. That's what we are to do, to love him. That word is agape. It means commitment. We are to commit ourselves, to commit our lives to God. And that doesn't mean based upon your feelings or your emotions that day. You didn't get up this morning and come to church and say, oh, by the way, I just feel all warm and fuzzy today, so therefore I'm going to worship the Lord. No, the cleric would be sitting there going, I'm ready to worship God. Just let me have it. But we are to love the Lord. It's a commitment. It's a decision to do that. Now, how are we to do it? We are to do it with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, and with all of our strength. Now, let me tell you what this message is not going to be about and what Jesus is not addressing here. He's not addressing the 4 different types of personalities. And let me read them to you. There's sanguine, there's phlegmatic, there's choleric, and there's melancholy, and we will define those. But I want to, at the very beginning, understand this, that when Jesus says and talks about our soul, he's talking about who we are. In other words, if I am a person, I am a soul, I'm not an animal in a sense of I'm of the human species. I am designed and created in the image of God, and he breathed into you and me the breath of life. That I know that I am Dane. I am a soul. I am an individual. And I am to love the Lord. The next one I want to talk about is our heart. That deals with passion and emotion and feeling. And we are to love God with all of our passion, our feelings, our emotions, that energy. The next thing that Jesus says, that we are to love the Lord with all of our strength. That's a tough one to break down. But it's basically a self-will that I make decisions, and those decisions are of my free doing and my will, and that also is something that I am in control over. And that is my strength. It's my strength. And I am to love the Lord with all of my will. That's my strength. And then the next thing, I'm to love the Lord with all of my mind. That's my cognitive thinking. That's my ability to make choices. That is when I think and I contemplate and I can deduce and I can plan out my tomorrow. That's my mind. God says, I want you to love me with all of that. Now, this is what I am going to do and what I am saying. Is that the 4 personality types that they're described here on the screen, all of them, or at least each one of them, kind of gravitate to one of these 4 areas that Jesus describes. So, for example, the sanguine is going to gravitate towards the soulishness of who they are. The phlegmatic is going to gravitate towards deep feelings of the heart. The choleric is going to gravitate towards that strength and that self-will. The melancholy is going to gravitate towards the mind and the thinking aspect of what Jesus is describing. So he's not describing necessarily the personalities, but I want us to know this morning that each one here has a unique and distinct personality, and that's what makes you special. But each one, we're going to gravitate to one of these four areas that Jesus is talking about, because we'll do that naturally. And what we'll do, hang on to this, is what we will do is we will avoid kind of the areas that our personality is not inclined to. But Jesus says, if you really want to love the Lord your God, you need to love him in not just the areas that you are gifted with and you are natural towards, but he says, I want you to worship me. I want you to love me in all of who you are, in even the areas that you're not necessarily prone to. And we're going to break this down and we're going to look at it. First of all, I want to state a little bit about kind of some of the personality tests and things that are out there. When I went through a really struggle in my life about 20 years ago, I was required to take the MMPI-2, now R, small r, test. It's the Minnesota, if I can get this right, the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory 2, R, small r. It's been revised a little bit. It's expensive. It's very expensive. And they probably ask you over 1,000 questions. And in this test, when you're done with it, they're able to take that inventory and evaluate you and better know how to talk to you and encourage you through the struggles of our lives and what we can work on. This morning, we're not going to take any MMPI-2 tests, okay? You're going to briefly and quickly kind of evaluate, you know who you are. We're going to kind of work through that. But one of the things that I found out after getting the results back of this test, and they even say about this test, that you cannot trick it. If you try to manipulate the test, it will come back saying that's exactly what you tried to do. And so when we got back the test, I sat down in front of my counselor, and he looked at me and he just shook my head. Shook his head. I shook mine. He shook my head. I said, "You're like my mom." It's okay. My dad didn't shake my head. He shook my whole body. But he shook his head at me, and he said, "You passed the test. It's not flawed. It didn't come back as a negative." But he looked at me and he said, "You must be really wiped out on Monday mornings." And I said, "What? Why? What do you see here that's so confusing?" And he said, "You came back as an extreme introvert on this test." And so we sat down and unpacked all of that for the next 2 or 3 months. And I'm saying all that to you to say this, that we're going to walk through this and we're going to see how sometimes our personalities can be in conflict with what we do. Is that making more sense now? We're going to have some fun this morning. And so what I want to do, if you see this is in your notes as well, if you want to follow along. What I want you to do is I'm going to read off, and the description is also in your outline, is the sanguine is the active, social, realist, performer, but very flexible person. I mean, it's like, hey, let's go out for lunch. Oh, they don't need to check their calendar. The melancholy does, it's like the phlegmatic, relaxed, peaceful, idealist, loves to harmonize, bring people together, but they're kind of uptight. The choleric, short-tempered, direct, fast, first, logical. So I love watching your faces. It's great. Some of you have already flipped out and have already been going through some of that things on the back, and looking at stuff. It's like, wow. And then the wife's usually sitting there going, and the husband's just shutting up, but what's going in his mind, because I won't say. Melancholy, analytical, quiet, an explorer, inventive and artistic. It's interesting when you look at this. You can look at how when God says to us, I want you to love me. God says it. I want you to love me with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. Notice that's vertical. That's a vertical relationship. Now you notice how Jesus ends this on the horizontal, doesn't he? You see, it's not just about us loving God, which is fantastic, which we're going to get to this, how we need to break this down and love God with every facet of who we are. But we also need to learn to know who we are and who other people are so that we can love them better. Equip yourself for that. You look at someone like Peter. Peter is definitely, he is a sanguine, and he is choleric. And can you imagine? And Thomas, you can imagine Thomas is a melancholy guy. He's very factual. And by the way, most scientists are melancholy. In fact, listen to what Tim LaHaye says about melancholy at the very end. He says, no temperate has as much natural potential when energized by the Holy Spirit as the melancholy. All the prophets were melancholy, as was Solomon and the Apostle John. Isn't that interesting? Let's also, he says this, most of the world's greatest composers, artists, musicians, inventors, philosophers, theologians, scientists, and dedicated educators have been predominantly melancholy. Interesting, isn't it? And so I want you to do is kind of walk through this. Now, most likely, you're going to fit into one or two categories. Okay? So mark off at least one or two categories where you're the dominant, where that's the dominant one. Mark it off. Now, over on the other side here, it says this, easy and hard. And it's kind of obvious, but what I've done here is if I'm sanguine, and that's dominant, then I'll tell you what's going to be easy for me and what's going to be hard. I'm going to find if I'm a sanguine, it's going to be easy to obey in the area that Jesus talked about as being the soul part of me. It's going to be easy for me to give that to the Lord. But it's going to be difficult for me, if I'm a sanguine, dealing with the melancholy part of me, my more quiet side. That's going to be a little bit more difficult because I don't want to look at those hidden parts of my personality, the ones that I want to avoid. I just don't want to talk about my feelings. So that's going to be difficult, but hang on to this. This is what I want to get to. God wants us in all of these areas. You and I have traits of all four. It's just the dominant ones are going to be one or two. And the other one, or the other two or three are going to be things not so dominant in your life, but still you have to address those areas because Jesus says you need to love the Lord with all of who you are, not just the easy parts, not just the ones that you like and that you enjoy and that you enjoy other people that are like you. Okay? We got to love God with all of these areas of our life. Now, let's walk through some questions here. Number one, your personality is God-given. Your personality is God-given. You are unique. You are special. To be honest with you, there's no psychological test that can actually pin down exactly who you are. This is just the best that the study of the mind and behavior can come up with. And they're fascinating because when you look at this, did you not look through this and go, yeah, I can see that in me. Yeah, I can see that in somebody else. But if you look at someone like Peter and Thomas, one's an introvert. Thomas is like this guy that goes, I don't believe it until I see it. I want the facts. He's a deep thinker. He's hardly mentioned, He's just a thinker. Peter, on the other hand, blurts out, says everything he wants to say. He gets himself, sticks his foot in his mouth. Thomas, it's like, just wants the facts. He's that scientific, logical mind. He's a deep thinker. But I want you to know this morning that this is not about ourselves in fault. It's the gift that God has given you is your unique personality. And this is what's interesting, is basically the personality that you have really can't be changed. It can't be changed. You can surrender areas and allow God to transform that melancholy in you. But you will always be that because that's the way God made you. I'm not here to talk about how you need to change your personality. No, because that would be changing that beautiful design that God created in you specially. And that's the problem that we have sometimes in dealing with people, is we try to change the other person. Doesn't work? Let me tell you, I've done a little bit of marriage counseling. And the more I do it, the more I know I'm no good at it. I like spiritual counseling. That's what I'm educated for. That's why God's called me to. But it's like I listen to people in a lot of marriage counseling, and I'm just going, I know the answer to this. They should just fix it. And then I talk to Jill. She's just like me and knows exactly what the answer is. Anyway, number two, your dominant personality types have positive and negative sides. You see, this is where we need to pay attention. Sometimes it's like my greatest gift and my greatest part of my personality can also be my weakness. Someone told me, and somebody has not told me just once, other people have said, your graciousness as a person sometimes is to a fault. See what I'm saying? It's that in us. And so we have positive sides and we have negative sides. And somebody asked me before church, it was great. It's like when they read through that, they felt like, well, what if you're a balance of all four? Well, I used to think earlier on that that's kind of cool. But what that usually does, it says that you have just as many faults, maybe more, because you have the positive side of those personalities and the negative sides too. Because guess what? These personalities are damaged by sin. Our nature, our human nature that consists of these four types of personalities have all been damaged because of sin. In other words, if God created us in his beauty and his perfect, just God's perfect nature that he created us with, not his nature, but our human nature, because sin entered this world, our nature, whatever personality trait you're dominant in, is slightly skewed. It's misaligned, it's misdirected. And that misdirection in all of these areas that we have is damaged by sin, and we call that a sinful nature. That bent is towards the wrong way. Even, hang on to this, even in areas that are maybe amoral, if you can grasp that for just a moment. Number 3, our personality, made up of all four types, just dominant more in others, needs to be surrendered to Jesus Christ. This is what Jesus is getting at, to love the Lord with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, with all of your mind. God wants all of it, not just some of it. So if you look at different areas, you look at, say the melancholies, the deep, and I would probably fit into that category, but this is the challenge, isn't it? This is the challenge. If I fit into that category, but yet there's other areas of my life I might not be as organized. I might not be a planner. God says, listen to this. You see, if we don't address all of it, then we make excuses for the areas that we fall short on. Does that make sense? God doesn't want our excuses. He wants us to be surrendered before Him. Not just justify who we are, even in our personality, but to allow God to say, even in these areas of our shortcomings, He wants all of who we are. The next one is, number 5. Our less dominant personality types can't be avoided. Did I miss a point? All of you melancholies, that was for you. Because I knew you wouldn't let me get away with it. Number 4, our dominant personality types are good and help us go deeper. This is important. Because God says, listen to this. Here, Kindle, jump to the very last slide. I'll just illustrate it with this last slide. You see this picture from last Sunday when I talked about the new electives that we are having, the new things that we're going to be doing, and the classes that are going to be taught. And you look at William Lane Craig, his Defender's class. That's analytical. It's deep. It's like you don't care about the personality of the teacher. You're just looking for content. Then you're going to naturally, the melancholy is going to go, oh, that's the class I'm going to sign up for. And you're looking at, experiencing God. It's like the clerks are going, that's me. I just want more of God and all of God. It's like, let's go get Him. And they're just like, yeah, charge. And that's okay. That's good. Because God uses those natural giftedness that you have that motivates you into a deeper walk with God. But what I'm telling you this morning is don't stop there. Because some of you this morning, God has raised, you have children. And you're going, I don't really care much about that analytical stuff. I just like practical things. I just like the practical things of life. I just want to get into a dialogue and discussion. And, you're that sanguine. It's like, you just get energy from the crowd. And you just love talking. And you're going to raise a child that is melancholy, that is deep and analytical. And they're going to go to school, and they're going to have questions. And they're going to come home, and they're going to ask you a question. And you're going to go, I have no idea how to answer that. So what I'm telling you is there's some parts of our personalities that will easily gravitate what we like. Don't use your personality, and don't use God, and don't use the church as your fast food diet. Sometimes you're going to have to go against what you naturally gravitate towards for you to go deeper with God. Okay, let's go to the next one. Number 5. Our less dominant personality types can't be avoided. I already did that, didn't I? There's a number 6. I know it. Here, bring up number 6. I don't have it in my own notes. You can tell what personality I am. Number 6. It is in loving God with all of who we are is transformative. Let me close with this. Therefore, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies. That's all of you. That's not just offer my body, okay? It's what Paul is saying here is offer all of who you are as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable This is your worship. Do not conform any longer to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The word transformed takes what is already in existence, and God begins to completely transform it into his likeness. I love this because I had a geology teacher when I was in college, and this guy loved rocks. I'm not kidding you. He loved rocks. And I'm not exaggerating whatsoever when I illustrate this, but he would come into class with a rock, and he would bring it in front of the class like this, and he would go, "This is a metamorphic rock. Not an igneous, not a sedimentary rock. This is a metamorphic rock." And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, this guy likes rocks. I'm thinking, it's a rock. My goodness. What does your wife think of you? She has to compete with a rock. And he would just go on and how this metamorphic rock is transformed and changed. In the deep depths of the earth. It doesn't matter if it's igneous. It doesn't matter if it's metamorphic. It doesn't even matter if it's sedimentary rock. But it's formed deep under the pressure of the earth. And then over time, it is brought to the surface. And we get to experience it. And I thought to myself, but I've never forgot what he did. I've never forgot what he said. And you're probably never going to forget this either. But a metamorphic rock, it doesn't matter if it starts out as an igneous rock. It doesn't matter if it starts off as a sedimentary rock. But under the deep pressure of the earth, both of those types of elements can be compressed and they change. And that's where you get marble and granite. They're beautiful. Because God will take your personality, and sometimes under pressure, sometimes under things that we go through, to take our personality and make it more like his. And that's what I want to challenge you to do, is to go deeper in your spiritual walk and allow God to transform the personality that you have and the little areas that you're just not too fond of, to allow and bring it to him in all areas of our life. We can truly love God. I wish I had more time, because that's the vertical. There's also the horizontal. And we got to stop trying to think we can change each other. You know what? You're such a quiet, such a sweet. And God made you. And you're beautiful. Okay?
Okay.
Then you got Peter. He's just much more expressive, aren't you? We can't look at each other and just try to change each other. We've got to come before the Lord. Look in the mirror. And all of us, all of me, needs to be brought before the Lord. Every head bowed and every eye closed.